Hi and welcome to the Green Room Mind, Body and Workspace. This is episode number 3 of talking about building a healthy work environment. My name is Dr. Alex George and my life passion is mental health and mental fitness. My background is I used to work in A&E, seeing car accidents, injuries, but also a lot of mental illness as well. And that's why I embarked on a career in advocacy, campaigning and education, and I really believe that everyone deserves to have good mental fitness. I'm looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to be talking about burnout. It's something that can affect anyone. So I'll hand over first of all to my panel to introduce themselves and say hello.
Thanks, Alex. My name is Sabira Jones. I am a corporate burnout prevention consultant and founder of the Fireproof Career, where we work with global brands to help them retain top performing talent, but also support ambitious professionals create work-life success so they can have career progression with none of the burnout.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. My name is Owen O'Kane. I'm a psychotherapist, Sunday Times bestselling author and former NHS lead for mental health. I've got approximately, at this stage, it's around 30 years in both physical and mental health. And over those years, I've seen a lot of people experience symptoms of burnout. So really happy to be here today and share my experience of what I see help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. Hi, I'm June Clark. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Manager for Nestlé UK and Ireland. And I've moved from a role where I was for many years in a very reactive role in occupational health to more of a proactive role in health and wellbeing for Nestlé.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Look, I'm excited to get going today. So let's dive straight into it because I think there's quite a lot of confusion about what burnout actually is. And I think it means different things to different people, but it is a clinical manifestation. It's something that's very serious if you experience it. And I don't want to kind of glaze over that. So I really want us to recognize what it is and also look at then thinking about how we kind of get ourselves out of that. I might start with you, Aspira, because you've had a personal experience with burnout. Of course, now you go out there and help a lot of people, spot the signs of it, prevent it and so on, but you have a very personal experience. I just wonder if you could kind of share some of that, if you're happy to, with us, because I think people at home might relate to some of that.
Absolutely. I think first we need to make sure we're all on the same page because there is a difference between being run down and being burnt out. So I often say to people, imagine using your laptop all day. A really hard thing to imagine. The battery dies and we think, oh, okay, this is not a terrible laptop. It just needs to be put back onto charge. And that's what happens with us. We're humans, incredible humans, but still humans. And after working through intense periods of times at work or going through an intense period in our personal lives, we need to allow ourselves to rest, recharge and reset. And that's what being run down is. However, imagine using your laptop all day and no matter how long you've left it on charge, it won't turn back on. Or if it does, it no longer functions at its optimum. And that's what it means to be burnt out. And I think a lot of people use the two terms interchangeably, but they're completely different things. Being run down is a natural phenomenon because we are humans. Being burnt out is part of the mental health crisis that we're seeing at the moment. And the two can manifest themselves in a similar way in that someone can feel exhausted, overwhelmed and tired. However, the difference with burnout is there's no amount of rest that you can do to recover from that level of stress that you're under. And it manifests itself with emotional, mental and physical symptoms. So for myself, I lived in a 4-year-long burnout cycle that started with completing my economics degree with my mum in a coma, started my first investment job 4 days after a funeral, almost dying from sepsis in between that. And then eventually I created what I considered, and my neurologist agreed, was the perfect work-life balance. In that as an investment analyst in my early 20s, I went to the gym 6 times a week, sometimes twice a day, a bit excessive on reflection.
That's not a lot.
I was predominantly plant-based, so good diet, millennial, so I was meditating religiously. And then when the reporting season was over, I was on 5-star all-inclusive resorts with the girls. So on paper, perfect work-life balance. However, 9 months of doing that, I went to bed with the flu. The next morning I woke up and I couldn't feel anything below my hips. And I thought, that's a bit odd. But because I was in the throes of burnout, depression, anxiety at the time, I didn't have the capacity to think maybe I should get this checked out. So I just carried on working from home because it didn't stop me from typing. It was just my lower body that had no mobility. Within a few weeks, I started getting migraines for the first time. And then I was forced to take time off work. I couldn't keep my eyes open to the light, so I definitely couldn't focus on a computer screen. decided that I was going to go back to work within 5 days because that was enough time for me to start feeling paranoid. My colleagues were going to think I was faking it, or maybe my performance was slipping, I couldn't hack it. So I got ready the Friday morning to go back to work, and I closed my left eye and realised I couldn't see out my right eye.
Wow.
So these are all
That
the
must have been
physical.
scary. Since then, you've made lots of changes and recognised a lot of perhaps things that contributed to that, and we'll kind of come on to some of that a little bit later. I mean, I might bring you in there. I mean, this idea of stress and burnout, they kind of become quite synonymous, and people kind of perhaps interchange the two, because not all stress is bad. Is that fair?
I mean, like every one of us will have stress at some points. I mean, I was thinking today on the way down here, I got a bit stressed before I came down today. I had various things going on at home, so a natural degree of stress is part of our everyday life. So I think stress can be healthy, it's useful, it can move us forward, it can help us make decisions, it can get us to a solution. The problem is accumulated stress. So when you're under stress for longer periods of time, I describe it like a bath filling with water. And it's okay for a bath to fill with water, but actually if eventually you're never kind of emptying the bath, and this water continues to build, then eventually will overflow. And I think very often with people who are burning out, what you discover is that actually they're on overload, and they've got to that point actually where there's kind of no moderating their stress levels, so it becomes difficult. Now, I think the good news story, I think the term burning out is problematic because it was created back in the 70s. And I think it's quite an extreme. When you think of burning out, you see it like as the end of the road. It's like a candle burning out. It's kind of, that's it, it's done. When actually I think it's quite a useful thing. Now I know obviously your story is, firstly really brave for you to share it, but it's extreme in the sense that sometimes people don't get to that extreme. They can catch it earlier, which is what you would hope would happen. But I think burnout can be really useful in a way that it's a barometer. So the moment you begin to notice that you're starting to exhaust, you're starting to wear down, it's kind of almost the body and the mind giving you a wake-up call that it's time for an adjustment, it's time to realign, it's time to rethink. So I kind of think one of the things I would love for us to explore today too is the positives of burnout, in the sense that it can actually, for a lot of people, get them back on track, and they can rebuild. They can rebuild very strongly from it. Unfortunately, it's a difficult road to take, and I don't advocate it. I'm not suggesting that anyone...
That's the one sometimes you have to try.
Yeah, I wouldn't be putting it on prescription. But for a lot of people, it just comes upon them, and suddenly they're there, and they're exhausted. And I think we probably at all various levels had it in our own lives.
It's kind of like that thing of like, I'll butcher the saying, but it's kind of like, if you don't stop, your body will stop you for you kind of thing. It's like, it is in essence, your mind, your body is saying, that's enough, mate, you've gone too far here.
Well, that brilliant expression, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of our bodies will inform, it'll kind of communicate very clearly, okay, time now to slow it down a bit, time to rethink, time to change focus, or really kind of reevaluate what you're doing. So I think when you get tuned in to your own body, to your own mind, your own emotional state, where you get to know them well, there you're kind of back in charge. But I think for most people I've met who have been burnt out or on the process of burning out, they feel like they're not in control.
It's a lack of control.
It's a lack of control.
Do you know, I might bring you in from, I guess, always going back in your background as well, of, working in occupational health as a nurse as well. The NHS is clearly a space where there's a lot of concern around burnout. We're seeing very high levels of junior doctor burnout, nursing burnout as well. I guess, like, what do you see as like the signs, and particularly the early signs of that someone might be burning out, from what you've seen in your experience, and of course your role now as well? What do you look out for?
I think it's a really interesting question, that, and I was really interested when you was talking about how you went through the physical symptoms, and one thing you said was you was working from home, and I think if you can work in a culture that's supportive enough that people will notice that you're behaving differently. And it's very different when it's hybrid. And the NHS is a really interesting concept because you can't work from home there. The NHS needs to be a culture where we notice when our junior doctors are getting burnt out. When we notice that people are hemorrhaging out of work, and attrition becomes higher because people won't stay in a toxic environment. You can hide it much better when you work from home because people, if all you're looking at is output, then it's easy to hide behind it. And unless you build that culture where people can recognise where they're getting a bit more under pressure, and it's not just healthy pressure, But I think in a workplace, you've got to build a culture where not just you can recognise it, but your colleagues and your line manager can recognise it. And I think that's a little bit of what feels like missing when you talk about junior doctors and the NHS staff.
So sometimes actually being on your own, people aren't able to spot it. So as someone that might be, lots of you watching, I hope, and listening, what kind of things would you look out for in yourself? Would you say, what are the things people like, I do get tired, I get run down or whatever, what do I really look out for?
Well, when we started putting together our mental wellbeing interventions at Nestlé, we did a lot of education around what is mental health, what is good mental health, what's severe mental health, and what's just a little bit run down, so that we could differentiate between somebody who's under a little bit of pressure. Because what we wanted to get to was if people felt they were under pressure, and not just because of work, because we've all got life pressures going on, they could get help sooner. And I think that's the real key to creating an inclusive culture, is that if you do feel like you're struggling, you can get help sooner. And we encourage our line managers to, if they're talking to their employees or to our colleagues, watch out when their performance does start to differ. Because if you know somebody really, really well and their performance suddenly takes a big dive, there's something going on. It's not just because they can't do the job anymore. You said I didn't want people to worry about my performance. If you'd been, surrounded by people who would catch that, then that's a much healthier place to be than just tiring away. Because what you don't want to get is to that extreme burnout that you got to.
So I had quite a severe physical manifestation of it, and the unseen part of it was my mental health. I differ with the World Health Organization. I don't think burnout's an occupational phenomenon. I think work is just the most quantifiable part of our life.
That's going to be my next question. They often we associate it synonymously with burnout, but what if your workplace is your haven?
Yeah, and for me, that's what it was. So I started my first investment job 4 days after my mum's funeral. In retrospect, I probably would do it again. It gave me something to hold on to and live for, and gave me a level of structure that I didn't have in my personal life. So my approach, as I call myself a recovering stress addict, is that whenever life got too much, I threw myself into what I could control. So initially it was my studies. I threw myself into what I can control. So my performance actually didn't slip because I was scared that anyone was going to see my performance slip. So oftentimes, by the time someone's performance starts to slip, that's when they're really in danger, because it's your most resilient people who are more susceptible to burning out. It's those who are naturally high performers and high achievers, because they don't dare want to let anyone else see that they're struggling. So they're going to throw themselves further into work. So actually, I would say one of the signs to look out for, particularly in a work environment, is who's logging on earlier than everyone else, who's logging off later than everyone else, who's working over the weekends. Because oftentimes they're trying to retain any control that they have in their life, and it's work. There's someone there measuring their performance, someone there who can validate that they're doing a good job. We don't have those same KPIs, the key performance indicators, in our private life, in our personal life. Who's measuring, when last did we wash the dishes or pack away our clothes? So I think sometimes it's a double-edged sword in that you can look out for those who aren't performing, but oftentimes it's those who are overperforming, overachieving. Those are the ones that we need to pay close attention to.
Yeah, important points.
And I think that's a really good point, because if you know somebody's suddenly gone from working 50 hours in their week to suddenly working 70, having that conversation early is really crucial in a caring way, though.
Yeah. Not
just to see you logging on at 5 o'clock. I manage my workload by starting. I'm an early bird. I think we said earlier I'm a real early bird, so I'm really fresh at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'll log on at 5 o'clock in the morning, but by 4 o'clock, I don't really want to have a meeting with you, because my energy's dipped right down. But that's how I work, and that's how I work effectively, and hybrid working has allowed that. So it's knowing who you're working with and what the preference is. If I was working till 8, 9 o'clock at night, you're not getting a good performance out of me at all. So yeah, you're right. I think watching that difference in performance and talking to people about it is really, really crucial, really early.
It is important to remember that that the stress can be a helpful thing. I often think that around things like exam season, kind of realistically, the reason that I knuckle down and do the revising, because I know that I need to pass that exam. It puts pressure on you, and you feel. I used to enjoy the stress around exams, actually, when it came to medical school most of the time, but that was because it wasn't going on and on and on. It was date in the diary.
Absolutely.
You build up and you climb the mountain, and then you do it, and then you come back down the mountain. And the issue is when, for me anyway, the way that I look at burnout is that, you know, we've gone all the way to the top of this mountain, and we've stayed up there, we haven't come back down again. And then you stay up there, and for a while you kind of, oh, well, I'm okay, I can deal with the stress, and you kind of pedaling away, and you're fine. Then eventually something slips. It's usually like maybe all three, but either emotions start going, or it's the emotional side or the mental health side or the physical side goes, and it's different with different people. But you know, for me, I think I noticed that I stopped like focusing and caring about the physical health side of stuff very early on. That kind of drops because I need to have it all together. Then it's probably the emotional side that I start going, you know, snappier and shorter, not enjoying stuff the same. And then it's like the kind of flatness that's the kind of last thing that I experienced when I've had burnout. Whereas now, because I know, and this is why it's important to talk about this, and we are going to move on through this conversation, you know, to a really positive space about how do we actually create working environments and life environments to, you know, to achieve the things we want to achieve. But it is important in a way to recognize the boundaries, like you're saying, you're learning your boundaries and learning about yourself, because then if I get to the point where this is starting, I want to step away from that. So I'm like, okay, I know I'm starting to kind of be a potential of being at risk of burnout. Let's backpedal, or let's look what's going on, what's changed, or what you're saying, what's happening at the moment that's changing this. So let's follow this through then. So, Owen, if you've got you know, if you're watching this, what do you kind of do? You know, because it's hard sometimes. People can, well, like, yeah, it sounds like me, but what am I supposed to do about that? Work's busy, right? Life's busy.
Your analogy is a brilliant one of the mountain, you know, and I guess with my therapist head on, my question will always be, when I meet people who are starting to display signs of burning out, you know, I can give them all the typical advice that you would expect about food, exercise, boundaries, all the stuff that we know about, you know, how do you manage your work-life balance. So people generally tend to know, it's not new information. But my question for people often is, okay, well, why do you need to be at the top of the mountain? Why do you need to be the best? Why do you need to keep achieving? Why do you feel that you need to be this person all the time? Because very often behind anyone who's struggling, what you'll find is that they have a whole load of beliefs about how they should be in the world or how they should be in the workplace. So, and we all do it. We all kind of carry these kind of images of how we believe we should be. And I think if we're doing our job properly, sometimes it's about helping people to stop and think, okay, maybe you don't need to keep going at that speed. Maybe you don't need to be the best. Maybe you don't need to be on top of the mountain the whole time, because I think very often what most of us do as people is that we all have stuff going on inside. Every one of us, we have emotional stuff, we have difficulties, we have old patterns. And I think we often look for the outside world to try and fix the inside stuff. And one place for that to happen is work. So, you know, if I become addicted to work, or I want to do well, or I want to get promoted, or I want to stay in the fast lane all the time, work's a really good place for that to happen, because I might get validated, I might get promoted, I might be shown as successful. So that can be really appealing for a lot of people, where they get their fix almost in the workplace, where they go to find the validation in work. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap where work becomes the identity. And I guess one of my key questions at the beginning is to try and work out, okay, what's driving all of this here? Where's the burning out coming from? Why do you continue repeating these patterns over and over and over again? Because I think they're important questions before you get to the solution. So I guess really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get someone, I mean, every client I have, when they come in and I work out that they're struggling, firstly I'm trying to differentiate whether they are beginning to burn out, or whether they have got they might be anxious, they might be depressed, they might have trauma. So you're always differentiating what you're working with. But if I do think someone's beginning to go down that road or beginning to exhaust, I'm always curious about, okay, what makes you do that? Because most people know they're doing it, but they just keep repeating it over and over and over again. And I think when you do that with people and you encourage them to maybe stop and kind of catch a beat and look in, then you can work from that. You've got a good solid framework, because I guess you can give people a lot of tools and a lot of solutions and techniques, but if they're going to go back and they're going to just keep repeating the same patterns over and over and over again, you're just going to find that it plays out. So I guess for me, it's always about steadying the inner platform.
So it's almost like avoiding the definition of madness and repeating the same thing.
Yeah. So
in a way, I guess, to be the important points of recognising why are we doing this. What would you add and say to proactive steps in terms of what you do next? Is it about stopping? Is it just about, right, I have to kind of stop completely, or is it, I imagine a little bit more to it than that perhaps, but what's your advice?
My first advice is do not quit your job. A lot of people think that that's going to help them, prevent or recover burnout, and it absolutely won't, because we at the Fireproof Career believe that stress is just like fire. So it can be productive, it can be constructive when it's well managed and well utilised. However, stress is just like fire. So it's mismanaged, misutilised, or worse, because we're high functioning, high performers, we're so accustomed to the heat, we don't realise it's occurring. So stress is like fire, then burnout is like a house fire. And imagine calling the fire brigade because your house is on fire. And their response is, really sorry, we can't make it, but could you please just breathe in
Breathe out.
and breathe out? Ridiculous, right?
Please leave the building. That's the advice.
And this is the thing. And the problem with that is, because stress is like fire and burnout's like a house fire, you need to take yourself out of the immediate danger. So you need to identify the stress, the unnecessary stress specifically, the dangerous fires, and start putting them out. So for example, by February, March 2019, I was effectively diagnosed with highly active, relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis. The sporadic immobility, the sporadic blindness was all due to the fact that I had the ultimate burnout of being diagnosed with MS. I knew I needed to take a step back from my career. However, one of the fires that I had at the time was £8,500 worth of consumer debt, because I decided that retail therapy was easier than natural therapy. And it was. It wasn't wise.
The good fun while you're doing it.
Great fun whilst I was doing it till the letters came in.
That's a big down.
There we go. So one of the first fires I had to put out of the unnecessary stress was paying off the majority of that debt so I could afford to take a career break. And then it was during that career break I started asking the questions of, who is Sabira? Why is it that I'm striving and throwing myself into work? What is it that I actually want to do? How do I want to live? What impact do I want to make with my work? But first and foremost, I had to come out of the burning building. And I think a lot of the time with burnout, because it is so volatile, you have to start doing the pragmatic things first. Because as we said earlier, the first thing that tends to happen is people lose their ability to have control of themselves and their lives. So by doing the pragmatic things, putting out the fires, putting certain things in place, it starts to put that person back in the driving seat of their life. And then once they're in the driving seat of their life, then we can ask them, okay, so what's your why? What is your North Star? What is your purpose, vision, direction? Because those are the two things that tend to happen. And I call it the burnout triage question, if you will. When I speak to people, I ask them, do you feel like you're in control of your life? Are you in the driving seat? If they can answer yes, great. You're probably run down, not burnout. Good. If you feel like you're maybe in the passenger seat or worse, being dragged behind the car, okay, the first thing we need to do is help you reinstate that sense of personal power and control. Second question, do you have a clear sense of purpose, vision and direction for your life? If no, just like going on a road trip without a destination, you're going to constantly be running on fumes because you haven't factored in where are your rest stops, where are those service stations, what's the best route you can take. Actually, when you get lost and you feel a bit muddled, instead of restarting from point A, because we wouldn't do that in a car journey, stop where you are and then reset and reassess the situation, relocate your purpose, your direction, and then go again. And so I think it's really important that we understand that, stress can be useful. And it's the reason why I was able to complete my dissertation in such conditions and so well. And so when you're talking about that, I did smile because I still like the thrill of a tight deadline. I do.
There is fun around like having, sometimes the pressure is good. It brings the best out of you. It's just like, not every day.
But you know what it is? It's the fact that there's nothing productive about having a high stress lifestyle. But there is something constructive about having a high pressure job, if you can leave the high pressure at work and don't bring it back home. And I think oftentimes it goes back to the fact that struggling at work is often the presenting problem, because effectively if there was a change at work but you're feeling stable and secure in your personal life, that change at work should not derail you. But if you don't feel comfortable and stable in your personal life, any change at work is going to completely throw you, because that's the last remnants of hope and control that you have left. So I truly believe that true burnout prevention is a lifestyle. Can you leave the burning building that is work, where actually the fires are productive and constructive, and go home to a lifestyle where you can rest, recover and reset, so that you're no longer operating between recovering and surviving, but you can shift over into thriving and recovering, because your personal life takes you out of that burning building.
So,
and I think that personal resilience is really important. if you can focus on building resilience rather than just talking about mental health all the time, that can also be really helpful, because we've all got different areas where we get our resilience from, and just looking and knowing how to flex between your different ways of being resilient is really important. Because if your most resilience is your social support, you lose your social support, where do you go then? If work's the highest part of your resilience and that gets tough, where do you go then? So I think understanding how you get your resilience and where you get it from is also really important.
Just to add to that, I think we have to also be mindful that resilience is a short-term strategy, not a long-term solution. Just to add, because I found myself being incredibly resilient, complete my degree with my mum in a coma, defeating sepsis, flying out to Greece the next week, and then beating a grown man on an inflatable water obstacle course in the middle of the ocean, just putting out there. And then starting my investment job 4 days after my mum's funeral, incredibly resilient. But because I took resilience as a lifestyle, not a short-term strategy, it kept me exposed to stress for a longer period of time, because I could tolerate stress for a long period of time. And if you're exposed to stress over a chronic period of time without proper intervention and measures put in place, you result in being burnt out. But then furthermore, I think for people with protected characteristics, irrespective of what they are, they tend to be more resilient than their counterpart, because resilience is a natural antidote to resistance. And so if you have protected characteristics, you tend to meet more resistance than your counterparts, particularly in a workspace. And so with that being said, the more resistance you meet, the more resilient you have to be, the more resilient you are, the more stress you can tolerate, the more stress you're likely to be exposed to. And ultimately, it can result to burnout, because burnout, just like a house fire, it's a creeper condition. It doesn't instantaneously combust. It happens over time. So I think resilience is great when it's a short-term strategy. Resilience is great when it's organizational resilience, how organizations respond to changes.
Do you know, coming to you just about, I guess a message of hope to people that are sat there thinking, well, I do feel burnt out. A message around recovery, like what kind of message would you share, around getting better and how people can move from that place to where they want to be?
So I work in occupational health and wellbeing. So from a business perspective, I think you're right. Don't hand your notice in unless you work in a really, really toxic environment and you can't ever face going back in again. Once you're coming out of that mental health crisis, if you know going back in is going to just perpetuate that, then don't hand your notice in, because we talk about high performance and high performing people. Most businesses want high performing people. They want to have great productivity, and they want to keep you. Most businesses don't want their talent walking out the door. No. So, work with your line manager, work with, the health professionals in your business if you can, and look at what does a really good, safe, solid return to work look like. And then just be really, really open about what that journey looks like from going back. So, from when I worked in occupational health, planning that return to work journey with the people you're going back to work with is really, really crucial. So you've got that support mechanism around you, because we value our employees. We don't want to lose them. So bringing them back and seeing them healthy again is hugely rewarding for everybody.
What about, if someone's kind of like, this is great, but I don't want to, like, there's so much shame and the stigma around, like, this idea of, using the word resilience, and I think we have probably quite similar ideas of resilience, the ability to kind of bend and flex and return back to where you want to be. It's not about necessarily stoicism, which is kind of like, I'm resilient, nothing affects me type thing. So there's a lot of stigma attached to it. What would you say to someone that's perhaps like, well, I don't want to like put my hand up and say that I'm struggling,
My experience has been, and I can only speak about my own experience with people that, who I've known who've come back to work, is actually the people that are coming back to work, they're coming back to work with, really care about them too. They've worked with them before they went off. So, getting ready for, if you don't want to talk about it, coming back to work and somebody saying, oh, where have you been? Just saying, actually, I don't really want to talk about it, stops it dead. And they won't come back and ask you that again, because they just think, oh, that's quite personal. But I think if you've got a culture where it feels okay to say, I haven't really been very well, but I'm getting better, that's the culture we really want to aspire to. So you don't have to hide it, and you don't feel that there's a stigma there that you can't come back, because that's why people don't come back. If there feels a stigma, they won't come back.
Very important. We're going to come on to work-based culture shortly. And I'm going to bring you in here.
I'm just that whole concept around shame and people talking about stuff. Certainly, I think one of the conversations, for anyone who knows my work, I'm not a massive fan of labels and over pathologizing people, because I think to be a human being, regardless of who you are, means that you're going to have ups and downs. And that might mean that sometimes your anxiety levels are high, your mood might drop, you might be less motivated. So I think when we're having this conversation about burning out, but I think it's a human story that most people at some levels will identify at certain points in their life. So I guess really, I think when I'm working with people, it's always about there's nothing wrong with you specifically. You know, you're not a problem. You're not defaulted. You're not a disorder. You're a human being who's just running low on the reserves. And I think that part of the conversation is really, really important, that actually for anyone watching who might be struggling at the minute, is that you're not a problem. You know, you don't need to be over pathologized, because I think that can often frighten people where they think, oh, there's something wrong with me, or this is terrible, or it's awful, or it's going to be debilitating. No, you're a human. You're going through a tough time. This could be a really useful way. This could be a really useful opportunity in your life to really start to look at yourself, get to know who you are, and start to build. So rather than cultures of shame, certainly when I'm in with corporates and I'm giving talks and delivering workshops, I kind of never go down that road, because I kind of think, okay, let's grab the opportunity. You know, what can we do with the workforce who's struggling? What can we learn from them? How can you create new cultures? So I think within it all, even though, look, for anyone who's had any kind of experience of burning out, I've had it a few times in my career. Thankfully, I've caught it pretty early. When you get the kind of early warning, okay, I'm exhausted, I need to kind of pull back a few steps. But I guess really, I think the good news stories and the optimism and the hope and the rebuilding is such an important part of this conversation. And I think we need to kind of foster that more. And we need to have more conversations about that. There are so many things. I often think that when clients come to me at the beginning, and every story will be different, you know, so, you know, I could meet 100 people in the same organisation who are really struggling, and they could all say, they all might meet criteria for some kind of form of burnout. But I know if I sit down with them all, I will discover very different reasons why they're beginning to exhaust. So Alex, if I was talking to you, you might think, okay, well, I'm a perfectionist and I can't get it right all of the time. So that might be driving you. You know, Sabira, you might say to me, I just can't cope with the expectation. I can't manage this level of overwhelm, so that might be feeding your burnout. It might be actually that you feel that, you know, June, that you're in a role that doesn't satisfy you, or it doesn't align with your values, so that's what's contributing to your burnout. So I think we operate in cultures where there's a belief that sometimes work and organisations are bad and they're the cause of burnout, where actually it's bigger than that. Human beings bring themselves to work, they bring their stories to work, they bring their experience, their background. So it's a much bigger conversation, and I think it's about coming back to that point about getting underneath the skin of why somebody might be struggling, but immediately getting on board with the fact, okay, there's a possibility here that we can move this forward, and we can move this forward quickly. And we can help them. Yeah, and I think from day one, years ago, I had a supervisor who was brilliant, and he would often say to me that when you meet anyone who's really struggling, they might feel a bit hopeless when they come in at the beginning, and they might feel, well, there's no point, this isn't going to go anywhere, or it's too much, it's too big. And he said something really powerful. He said, when you're working with people, if they do feel hopeless or they feel it's not going to go anywhere, you know, you let them know at the beginning that you're hopeful. And that you hold on to the hope until they're ready, kind of almost bit by bit to take it. I think that's a really powerful way to work, that if somebody is exhausted, that you hold on to the hope. And if you're an employer, you hold on to the hope that they can improve, they can recover. And then bit by bit, step by step, you hand over.
Amazing. Great advice.
So I think what it is as well is that it's not solely your responsibility. For some, the line managers have now been given that responsibility to hold on hope for their direct reports when they don't have it themselves. So I think organisations need to also have a culture of talking about burnout, because the only reason why I talk about burnout is because I want individuals to have careers that fuel them and doesn't consume them. I want organisations to be able to achieve sustainable high performance. But the biggest obstacle to that is burnout. So I think it's getting comfortable having these conversations, not just to address a problem, but to put it into perspective. Why are we having the conversations? Because we want solutions. I'm a huge believer that we should be spending like a good 15% talking about the problem and 85% focusing on the solution. But if we try to bypass the problem entirely, you're never going to get a sustainable solution.
No. Absolutely. June, when you're kind of looking at the workforce that you have, there's a lot of people that you're thinking about. What is considered like well-being at work, a healthy work environment? Like, what does that mean in the context of how do you do that?
It's a really difficult question, that, because well-being means one thing to me, and it means one thing to you, and means one thing to you, and one thing to you. I think when you're talking about healthy performance, I think it's really, really interesting to just work out what you mean by healthy performance. So my performance is, I'm assessed against not just what I do, but how I do it. So, at the end of the year, when I get my performance review, I'm not just, I've got to hit my goals. I want to hit my goals. I'm a high performer. I really, really want to hit my goals. But I won't get assessed in, my performance won't be seen as good if I haven't done it in the right way. So I think it's really important that it's not just about the what, it's about the how. And I think that means more to most people, because you can chase the what for a number of years, but you'll run out of people, you'll run out of energy, you'll run out of steam. If you start putting the emphasis on the how as well, that's when you build a much more high performing workforce. So you can put all sorts of wellbeing initiatives in, but I think you've got to understand what do your people need out of those wellbeing initiatives. So making sure you've got good data, is always a really good, we know what our absence causes are. As with most manufacturing industries, it's musculoskeletal problems or mental health problems. So how do you make sure that you do some preventative work rather than just reacting all the time? And I think that's really important, is you look at your data, you look at your people, and you think, what can I put in place so that we're not reacting, we're actually preventing?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's twofold in some ways, but I mean, a lot of people, when they struggle, they genuinely step forward and they don't know where to start. And I think there's an important thing that very often when people are going through tough times, they might be clinically anxious and they might have some degree of secondary depression as a result of burning out. So I think, the strategies that we often talk about, somebody who's quite depressed as a result of being burnt out may not be able to employ them straight away. They just won't be able to find that level of resilience, or they may not be able to dig that deep. And I think certainly in any of my work, I often try, whether it's with an organisation or with an individual, what I'll try and do is break down and think, okay, this is not just one problem. It's a number of things, but if you start to work on them individually, then things really significantly improve. So it might be, okay, you're locked in a particular way of thinking. So very often when people are exhausted, they have got very negative critical mindsets. So you first of all get to work on that. Okay, how can we start to work on helping you create more psychological flexibility? They often have emotional states where they just don't know what to do with the feeling. They've got these big emotions that keep coming up, but they have no idea how to manage them. So you're teaching them how to manage the emotion. People often engage in behaviours that often don't suit them very well. They don't fit well for them when they're exhausted. So they may be drinking too much. They may be eating the wrong foods. They may be surrounding themselves with the wrong people. So you're trying to break down all of life and think, okay, this is not one thing. How are you managing day to day? How are you managing your mind? How are you managing your emotions? What behaviours are working for you? What behaviours are getting in the way? Who are the people in your life who lift you up? Who are the people who are dragging you down? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis that helps you manage? Because I think there's a danger sometimes that people believe that there's an instantaneous, give me this solution and it's all going to be better. When actually, and this is a hard part of the conversation, I mean, no one recovers unless they're willing to recover and they're willing to look at the difficult stuff, because that is part of the conversation here, that when we face any difficulty in life, it means that we often have to look at who we are. And that means that we have to take responsibility and we have to commit to the things that we know help us recover. And sometimes people can really struggle with that. So I sometimes get annoyed when I'm in conversations and people think the employer should be doing that, the employer should be doing this, and it all becomes the employer's responsibility, whereas actually, no, that is not strictly true. The individual has to take responsibility for how they're managing their lives. And that's often, that's not an easy conversation to have at the beginning, but it's one of the most empowering conversations you can have with somebody, because then they begin to not only deconstruct their own life, but then they bring a better version of who they are into work. And I think when you're working with organisations, if you can teach them in some ways to do a similar approach, that it's not just about creating a tick box support programme, It's not just about doing a one-day training. It's about creating a culture where
You're
you're working in mindsets.
Get the culture
yeah.
right.
So you have cultures where people can think creatively. You've got cultures where it's okay to have an emotional reaction, or you can talk about stuff. So it's kind of almost like a tandem approach.
Absolutely.
You know, how you're targeting the individual is how you target the organisation.
Yeah, I think that's really useful advice though. And I was just really thinking about, like, you know, the kind of well-being space at work is kind of confusing term. I think Junior kind of saying that we'll all have a different idea and view of that. And some might imagine kind of like a very leafy office space, everything's relaxed and zen and calm, but actually you can have good well-being and kind of environment at work that is kind of busy, and you know, everyone's kind of running around doing their thing, and that can still also be positive. So there's lots of different ideas of what that might look like. So I guess I'm opening the floor here. You know, what is the fundamentals of, like, what makes good well-being at work? Is it about what the environment is actually like and what's around you and what you see and what is around you, or is it a more set of principles? Is it a culture? Is it an ideal? What is it?
I think for me it goes beyond nice plants and nice windows and nice offices. We've got lovely plants. We've got a lovely office. But if it's not a comfortable place to work in, then that you're not going to work at your best for that. You know, when you said somewhere nice and zen, I couldn't think of anything worse than sitting there not daring to move in case I make a loud noise. So again, it's having those. You have to treat people as individuals, because well-being means so much to so many different people. You know, so if you look around here, we've got quiet spaces, you know, we've got collaborative spaces. You can't create an office that works for everybody. It's that culture that supports that workplace, not just the environment that you work in. The environment's lovely, and it's nice to come into a lovely office. And you need the good light and the good heat and to be comfortable. But I think you've got to also feel that you're in a culture that's going to support you. And there is no stigma. So if you are struggling, there is no stigma.
Listeners is important as well, isn't it? Because I mean,
yes.
The challenges of working in like the NHS settings, because it's such a big machine, the whole thing is such a big machine. I think the individual sometimes doesn't always feel that they do have that ability. Perhaps certainly before the pandemic, I think I noticed the hospital I was working during the pandemic actually did a really good job at reacting to a lot of things that were happening and realising the importance of having people that we could speak to as doctors. You know, funny, the doctors need fixing too as well, you know, and I think I hope to see that, you know, not just talking about the NHS here, but all workplaces do genuinely listen and react. You know, I think that's really important, because if you're kind of tone deaf to what's going on the shop floor, if you like, then that's where problems arise. And people start thinking, well, there's no point me going and talking to my line manager because no one's going to change anything. Things won't change. And that's a dangerous cycle, isn't it? But on the opposite side, if you've got a culture that listens and reacts, then yeah, you feel value, don't you? I think value and feeling that you're which you are an important person, I think it's vital for good health, I think, in the workspace.
And I think sometimes it's worse if you put in these interventions in, so, you know, you can get mental health support as and when you want it, but unless you actually support those people who are going through getting that mental health support, then it's no point in having it at all, really. You know, there's no point in just saying, okay, we'll pay a fortune for you to have counselling, but we expect when you come back at your 100% and you just carry on, and we're not going to change what we did. We just expect you to carry on. And I think just recognising that, you know, we are all individuals. I work much better if everything's happy at home. Much better if everything's happy at home. I'm much more influenced by things that go wrong at home than I am by things that go wrong at work. Yeah. So, you know, just realising that, you know, we do bring whoever we are to work, we bring ourselves to work. But having that conversation around, you know, I can't do anything to help you at home, but how can I help you while you're here with me? Is really, really important.
Like, how can even things like, you know, if home's stressful because you've got the children trying to get them to school or whatever, so, well, actually, why don't we be flexible with your hours, or what can we do in that space? That there are sometimes things that perhaps we don't realise that we can do that are actually maybe hopefully simple, but actually can make a big difference to someone's life, of being like adaptable, I guess. And there's something about, like, you know, I think there's certainly things that my own team and stuff is like trusting people to manage their own time as well. It's like, I trust you to do the job in the way that you think it's done best, and also the way that suits you best. And just like not micromanaging everything to a level. You need to be in at 9, you need to leave at what way do you want to manage this that works for your life?
It's funny you talking about the NHS. So I worked in A&E back in the day as well, and palliative care. So
How back in the day was back in the day?
Very back in the day. I'm old, like not as young as you, but very back in the day. And it was hardcore. It was like, it was non-stop. And I was in palliative care, and it was difficult work. It was very, very intense. So my career has been in health and psychology over the last 30 years. But I remember years ago managing, it's quite a big palliative care team, and it was stressful. And they were dealing with death and dying every day. So it was a really intense environment. And I remember, at one point recognising that the team were really exhausted and they were tired, and there was a lot of difficulties around. And I implemented this thing on a Friday. It was called Fish and Chip Friday.
I can literally buy into that already.
I mean, honestly, so this is not like, there's no kind of clever well-being strategy here. But what we did on a Friday was we went out, there was a local fish and chip shop around the corner from where we worked. And every lunchtime on a Friday, we had Fish and Chip Friday, was just part of what we did. That was probably one of the most powerful initiatives I've ever seen work effectively, because the team looked forward to it. And I remember thinking about, we had tried everything. We had done a lot of talks. We'd done Occy health policies. We'd done all sorts of initiatives. We had all sorts of people coming in. But I remember there was something really powerful about that. And what it's, when I'm delivering talks, I often share this example. The powerful thing about that was it was a place for people to be human. So their humanity could come out on, they could just be there and they could talk. And we saw the human side of people. There was a freedom and there was an openness. And I guess really, I think one of the mistakes I see cultures make in the workplace is that they forget about the fact that most people just generally, they want to feel safe, they want to feel heard, they want to feel understood, and they want to just feel part of something. And I think most people, when they're at work, if the employer can tick those boxes, generally most people level out pretty well. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, and that doesn't mean that it's a great environment, but if people feel generally supported, even when things are difficult, because my team were watching people die regularly on their shifts. So I knew the situation was difficult and they were dealing with very stressful emotions a lot of the time. But actually just that kind of focusing on their humanity, even the kind of the laughter and the just being a human being, sometimes laughing at stupid stuff, just bringing humour into culture.
A lot of people think, you used to go to an A&E shop floor and think, gosh, it's so stressful, but we use humour to get through stuff. And it could be silly, laughing about silly things we've seen on a show the other night or whatever it is, or whatever it might be. It just kind of, it does get you through. And it really, not to be geeky here, but it kind of reminds me of that job demand resource model, right? That kind of idea that your demands can be really high, but if you've got really good resource, and that resource is, the people around you, the team, and all the things that all of you have mentioned, it's amazing what people will go in and have enjoy and actually go to work and be like, this is great, I'm enjoying this. Well, how can you? You've got so much pressure, but the resource is there. Obviously, that's not finite, but to a level.
So for me, for example, speaking very candidly as a black woman, I don't have the freedom and luxury to bring my authentic self, my true self to work, but I do bring my authentic self to work as far as my expertise, as far as who I am as a person. But I'm acutely aware that there are actual implicit and explicit barriers that prevent me from bringing my authentic self to work. So what I find more helpful, and even in personal experience of having a 17-month racially motivated bullying campaign, which was spearheaded by a HR director, what I would have found helpful in that moment is actually tick box. What is your zero tolerance policy? How do you put that into effect? And that brings safety and security. If there's no clarity on what the policies are in effect, then people aren't going to feel that sense of security irrespective of what their background is. If people aren't being empowered to actually show up in their authentic self, to have the autonomy to work in the way that they need to work in order to meet the goals and the outcome of the organisation, you're not going to get that security and safety regardless of how much money you invest in different training, different occupational health assessments and so forth, because those things are put there. But it's the lack of policies, it's the lack of codified how we're going to work is what makes a lot of people feel unsure and unsafe. And even with offering people employee assistance program, if they think that the organisation that they're working for is then going to monitor who's actually using it, who's gone to counselling, who's gone to therapy, and then it comes to redundancy time, am I going to be the one who's going to be made redundant because I'm not going to be seen as capable of doing my job? That creates the sense of insecurity that greatly affects whether people are going to burn out or not.
Very powerfully put. Thank you for sharing your story as well.
But you won't retain talent unless you've got a better culture than the next person that people are going to. because as a workforce, we can be quite transient now. You know, the days of somebody getting a job and that was them for life, people don't think that way anymore. So you've got to create a better culture to actually retain your talent, because your talent will soon go somewhere else. You know, I've worked with Nestlé for nearly 19 years now, and I've stayed here because the culture suits me. It's a culture where I feel I've been able to thrive. So I could have gone round different, you know, I get bored after 4 or 5 years, but they've found me something every 4 or 5 years that have allowed me to work in a very different way. But it's the culture that's allowed me to grow. You know, we all want to keep high performers, but we've got to do it a little bit better than the company down the road. Otherwise, we'll just all move on.
That's a great point about having a culture with scope for progression, because a lot of people do leave for that reason. And I think it's really important. One of the things that my corporate clients often ask me as we're having our initial conversations, is there going to be a mass exodus? If we invest in our people and help them with their career progression and prevent burnout, will they suddenly leave and go somewhere else? And I often laugh because it's two things here. Number one, if people are going to leave, they're going to leave regardless.
They're going to leave anyway.
If they're going to want new opportunities, or they discover actually this job, this company is not best fit for me, that's actually better economies of scale for the organisation, because they can hire someone in who wants to be there and who's actually going to help with the organisational development. Secondly, there's a difference between talent loss and talent transference. So people are going to leave organisations and go to somewhere else. That's talent transference. Talent loss happens when people leave the working economy entirely because they're burnt out. And then lastly, in terms of retaining talent, are you creating that pipeline of talent in your organisation? I believe all your people deserve support, and that's when employee wellbeing and so forth comes in. But where's the career accelerators for early career talents, for professionals with protected characteristics, and your line managers? Because if you can hit those 3 cohorts within your organisation, you're building that talent spine within your organisation. So yeah, people may leave and you have that osmosis of talent from organisations and even different industries. But you have a core set of people within your organisation, people like yourself, June, who are invaluable to the organisation. That tenure is incredible. I've met you for a few moments. I'm sure you're invaluable to Nestlé. And I think it's looking at actually the career development, helping people accelerate in their career for all the success and less of the stress.
And accelerate in the way they want to accelerate it, rather than just feeling, you know, you've got to be the next CEO.
Yeah, it's not
we don't always want to be the next CEO.
Can I be slightly controversial? I agree with all of it.
Controversial at the end. We're on our final points here.
I agree largely with what you're all saying, and I agree there has to be due diligence, there has to be process, there has to be equality right across the board. They're all givens. I think that is the world we live in. It's the world we should live in. And I think that should be in place for most organisations, and I hope most organisations know that, and if they don't know it, that they learn to know it and they start working on it. What I see a lot of the time when I go into organisations is that first of all, if you look at the organisation, regardless of the business, they have a job to do, which is to grow a business and to sell products or to develop whatever they're doing. So they have a job to do. And I think sometimes what I see is a conflict of two worlds, where the employer is trying to do their job, they're trying to grow and they're trying to build. And sometimes they have a workforce demanding and telling them how they need to be for them. I need the workplace to be this, I need it to be that, you need to give me this, you need to give me that. And I think in the real world that's not always possible. And in the real world there are sometimes going to be stressful moments when you are going to have to step up and you're going to have to manage some of the difficulties that come. And I see this all the time when I go in and I speak with HR organisations where they feel almost disempowered, where they think we don't know what to do because we can't challenge people anymore, or we can't have difficult conversations with them. And I think it's a two-way street where actually employer and employees need to start working more closely together and kind of understanding each other better, because at the end of the day, a business has to be, it's a business, it has to run, it has to develop, and it wants to grow. Now, that doesn't mean that they treat the workforce disrespectfully and they don't see their needs. But at the same time, it is not an employer's responsibility to create a workforce that suits the individual. That isn't the world we live in. And I think that degree of psychological flexibility where people go into work to do their job and hopefully do it as well as possible, but to realise that sometimes your employer isn't going to be able to devise a schedule or a way of working that is entirely suited to you. There might be some degree. Look, in my work, as a therapist, the whole time when you're working with people, you're really trying to encourage them to be psychologically more flexible. There's a great analogy, if you've got a car and it's got a rigid suspension, it's a really bumpy journey. Whereas if you've got a car, that's got a good suspension, it's much more fluid because you can there's rise and fall, and you can move with that. And I think this entire conversation is in essence also about the need for flexibility on both sides.
Absolutely.
And understanding, and the fact that we just kind of need to understand, I think employers need to listen more to employees without doubt. But I also think employees also need to understand the pressures that managers and, the MDs and the organisations are under, because they are also trying to do something. So I think there's just a lot more listening to be done. As opposed to dictating terms.
We've covered a lot today, and it has been a relatively smooth ride. The suspension's been decent on the car, so we'll keep working on that. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, June. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Sabira, for all your insights and advice today. And of course, thank you to Lyreco and Nescafé as well for bringing you this episode. I really hope you found this, helpful, and there's lots to kind of, implement, whether you're an individual that's thinking, gosh, am I facing burnout, whether you're working as a manager, whether this is your organisation. I think ultimately our goal in life shouldn't be, the absence of mental illness. I think we should be aiming to enjoy life, to have mental fitness, to be able to go to work and show up in the ways that we want to and really enjoy that experience. So a useful conversation, I hope. If you want more information, you can head to Lyreco website, and there's more advice and information about burnout there. But for now, it's a thank you from us, and take care. Have a wonderful day, whatever you're doing. Take care.